So the past few videos I've been showing you the documentary hypothesis in the Bible. I've literally been showing it to you. um, now, what do I think about that? Well, I was always raised with documentary hypothesis. Told that I was never told Moses wrote it. Um, and I was shocked actually when I heard people when I was about 19 say that Moses wrote the Torah, and I thought it was the stupidest thing because how is that possible? And like it was either Nietzsche or Voltaire said that if Moses wrote the Torah, then he's the most arrogant man in the world because he writes that he is the most humblest man in the world, the most humble man in the world, not most humblestest. But so it doesn't really change anything. To me, it makes it far more mystical, much more in depth. We can see the four different views of God, or you could say the two. E and J, and then E and J were put together, and then P wrote a separate text to basically refute the EJ text, and then you had D come along, weave them together, and put his own ideas in there. He wrote the history. But I also believe the history was a compilation, much like, especially Kings and Samuel. It's a compilation similar to the Torah, and I'd love to find out more about that, and God willing, I will in this lifetime. But it's funny, the parts of Genesis that I really loved and I thought were really spiritual came from the priestly part of it, the priestly text, which I was like, oh no, come on, And I wound up liking the Yahwehist version of it a lot more because I was always Elohim, Allah, same thing, so you can see the true scripture in there and blah 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 blah. Well, it's to me it doesn't diminish anything. If anything, it's almost, I don't want to say proof of a book from God, but you have these four theologies, four personal views of God woven in together. There's a medieval text, I don't know if it's Sinaiticus or Vaticanus, where that's what's done with the Gospels. They're basically interwoven. Uh, but I think for that they did take parts out to make it fit. I think there are some verses missing there. But I think it shows the Torah is really old because if you've ever read any old critiques of the Torah before the discovery of Qumran, there were people saying that it was made in the 2nd century BC or uh, even later on, that it developed up with Christianity and that it was finalized in the 3rd century. People saying idiotic stuff like that. Now we know it goes back old. It goes back before the captivity. And even the writers that thought that it was done during the right after the captivity of Ezra said no, they've all pulled their dates back. I have a suspicion that E is older. That's just my suspicion. I'm not a scholar of Hebrew or anything, but I would suspect E is older than J. But they seem to think J is the oldest, and it was a female writer. Uh, and that then E shortly after, but not in competition, just two different views. In somewhat competition because they tend to slander the brothers. Different brothers get faulted for different things of the sons of Israel. And then you have P-Tex come along saying it doesn't like this guy that's always intervening and everything and interacting with people and sending angels. But the funny thing is that P is called the cosmic God and EJ is the personal God. But there are times when the cosmic God is very personal, does meet with man, and there's many times when EJ is very cosmic and transcended God. And I think that's what makes it the powerful, beautiful thing that it is that yes, they are talking about the same God, but they have different focuses, different points. 4 authors of the Torah, 4 Gospels. I'm not going to get overly mystical and say that's a sign or revelation or anything, but I just think that's cool. Again, I think we should look at all the documents. That's why this idea, well, the Western idea of canon is very silly. In the East, we don't read the Book of Revelations. Not in church. But that's one of our books. We love it. Letters of Ignatius, the Epistle of Barnabas, the Didache. For me, the Didache is it. That's all the common man needs to know. If they have that memorized, it would do them better than trying to decipher a library and get their theology from that, rather than just being fed from the mother. Now, this will infuriate people and say, how can you be that stupid? How could you be that blind? Blah, 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 blah. But it's not the same thing. It's not, again, in Orthodoxy, it seems that there are many paths, many, many, many paths, and people on their own path doing their own thing, and still inside the hedge of Orthodoxy. Say, come on inside, the water's warm. Just go to a service. I don't ever ask people to join, just go. And I intentionally do not proselytize. The thing is, I'm saying is, if you have an urge, if you be around spiritual people, singing the psalms that they did in the synagogue, similar tones, and be in a place of real sanctuary and prayer and holiness. There's no plays, Sunday school plays going on in the temple. There's no jam bands, no squirt gun fights. There's no glitter, confetti, none of that. It's the temple that we go to. And they say the Torah is the Torah of love. Well, that's what we have in the Eucharist. That's the love. That's where the forgiveness of sins comes from. How the Jews enshrine the Torah, that's how we enshrine the Eucharist. That's how important it is to us. People are going to point and say, Judaizers, remember, the movement came out of Judaism, merged with Hellenism, merged with, well, the Greeks. So Greek and Roman, Greco-Roman. And by about the 5th century, that got solidified, and we have that. And there are even older liturgies that are basically set in stone and are practiced the exact same way they were back then that they are today. And that's an extremely powerful thing. And just like the Torah, people copying it down for word, keeping the tradition. And the Dead Sea Scrolls bear testament to this, that there's not huge, massive changes. That's what our job is to preserve and to pass down. Not to create new theologies, not to invent things, not to get creative when it comes to religion. But to pass it down, to keep it alive. That's what oral tradition did. And I think with all these book reading and everything, we think we can get our spirituality from books, and sitting alone in our little cells and philosophizing on things, and not being part of the body, and not participating in the acts that our ancestors did. And I think that's very powerful. Praying the same prayers that your ancestors did for thousands of years, or at least 15 centuries, married in the same way, buried in the same way, born into it, baptized in the same way. It's extremely powerful. And when you're praying those prayers, you can know that there are millions of people across the world that are praying those exact same prayers. This did change topic, but I think fittingly so. That's how my mind rambles. Peace to you. And the documentary hypothesis doesn't run counter to orthodoxy in any such way. In church, they're called the books of Moses. Hebrews called the book of Paul. That's the tradition passed down to us, and we don't change it. We still call those the book of Moses. Moses is a big character. Saying that he wrote them isn't even incorrect. Did he write them? Did he write a word? No. Peace to you. Keep the tradition alive. Pass it down. It's how we have Halloween, all these other things. It's because it got passed down. We should remember the oral tradition. And make sure the words can be in our mouths at any time instead of just reading them off a sheet of paper. That's what I loved when I was constantly going to church. I had the Psalms just flowing through me, and the hymns of the ancient church. Peace to you. Just told that. I was never told Moses wrote it. And I was shocked, actually, when I heard people when I was about 19 say that Moses wrote the Torah, and I thought it was the stupidest thing, because how is that possible? And it was either Nietzsche or Voltaire said that if Moses wrote the Torah, then he's the most arrogant man in the world, because he writes that he is the most humblest man in the world, the most humble man in the world, not most humblest, most humblestest. But J, and then E and J were put together, and then P wrote a separate text to basically refute the EJ text, and then you had D come along, weave them together, and put his own ideas in there. So it doesn't really change anything. To me, it makes it far more mystical, much more in depth. We can see the 4 different views of God, or you could say the 2. E and so the past few videos I've been showing you the documentary hypothesis in the Bible. I've literally been showing it to you. Now, what do I think about that? Well, I was always raised with documentary hypothesis.